Thank you again. Thanks, Peter. And we will expect you, if you don't mind, to see you this afternoon.
Yes,
we
sure.
are the second talk of our presentations, our event today, and I want to welcome Dr. Carson from Monash University. Carson and I traveled together in Asia Pacific and also in London when we went to Oxford University. But more than that, Carson, he's a good friend who helps the Somali community here in Melbourne. We're actually going through a survey where we're trying to educate the Somali community, and there are other projects hopefully in the pipeline. But without further ado, I want to welcome Carson, and please share with us your ideas about this topic. And if there are questions, I hope you can answer them. So thank you, Carson. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mohamed, and thanks for the invitation to take part in this. I think it's an important thing to meet and talk about these topics, and we have seen in Peter's talk that connectivity is growing, that we get more access to mobile phones, to computers, etc. And my side is basically looking at the risks of that and what can we do about it. And sorry that you need to listen to another talk with a strong German accent, much stronger than Peter's probably, but quite a few Germans here. So I've not prepared any slides. I really wanted to keep that a bit more open. So if there are any questions that go into Facebook or into the chat, or I think there's a question and answer panel as well in the Zoom. So anything that comes up that I can see, or maybe Mohamed can see, and then ask in between, we can change what I talk about and really talk about that. So I'm Carsten, and I'm an associate professor for cybersecurity at Monash, and I'm also the head of department for software systems and cybersecurity. But probably more relevant is that I'm the director of research for the Oceania Cybersecurity Center, and that's where I think Mohamed and myself, we have traveled a bit in that context across the Pacific region, because that center works with countries across the Pacific Islands mainly on supporting them with their national cybersecurity. And many of these countries are very different to Somalia, much smaller, less population, but also spread out a lot. But they share that the connectivity is increasing. We get more cables, we get more bandwidth, we get more services online, payments online, money transfer, remittances, all these kind of topics we also have in the Pacific region. So I'm quite familiar, I think, with some of the things, also in a very different context. But what I really want to do is maybe tell a few stories and then see what kind of questions come up. And the first thing I want to talk about is really, we have this idea that cybersecurity means that there's these hackers sitting somewhere, and they are really tech savvy people. They know exactly how computers work. They can program very well, and they can hack into your computers. And we kind of feel that they are much better in understanding how computers work than most of the people are, and we can't really do a lot against it. And I would like to argue a bit that this is not actually how things work that much. I mean, these kind of people exist. We have these state-based hackers who know about vulnerabilities that we don't know about, and who can do interesting things in hacking into computers. But that's not the majority of the problems we have. And I want to start with a small story from the time before we had computers at home and before we had mobile phones. It was actually when I was in primary school in Germany. And we had telephones that had a cable that was coming out of the wall. It was not even plugged in, because that was owned by, which was called Deutsche Bundespost at that time, which now has been split up into Telekom and other areas. So the German Post Office, basically, the national one, would provide you a telephone, and they would kind of own the cable as well. So you're not really allowed to touch it. And at that time, mother of a good friend of mine, when I was in primary school, she suddenly came to our home and she said, can I use your telephone? My telephone is not working. I need to call the Deutsche Bundespost, the German post office, to get it fixed. And my mother said, yeah, of course. Yeah, go use my telephone and you can call them. Yeah, but what happened? And she didn't really want to tell. And then after a while, she told, and she said, she's really embarrassed. But somebody called her on the phone and explained, yeah, they are from the German Bundespost, and there's some technical issues with her phone, and they need her support in it. And the thing that she needs to do for them to test their phone is to take scissors and cut the cable. And this was, of course, a really stupid joke and scam. And but she thought, yeah, that's some guy from the German Post Office, and he's an authority in that, and he knows what he's doing. So she took scissors and cut the cable. Of course, she had no phone after that, and that's kind of where she trusted that person, because that person claimed they're from that post office, and she did something that is really, the principle, if you think about it, is rather stupid, because you would know after that your phone would no longer work and you would need a technician to come to fix it.
Mm.
But you did it anyway. And I think a lot of the scams that we have are kind of on that level, except that this one was just basically somebody joking around, trying to, just because they could do it, tricking people into doing something stupid. But now people do that kind of level of scams to get money, like to get financial gains. And I know personally in my family and also friends, I know a few people who kind of fell for these kind of scams. And it is people claiming, well, in Australia, I'm from Telstra, and we can see from your internet traffic that your computer might be infected with some bad virus. And that seems to be a credible story, because, I mean, they are the telco, so they can see my internet traffic. Sure. So in principle, theoretically, it would be possible to scan it for malicious behavior, except they don't. There's no service with Telstra where they would kind of be friendly enough to call you and tell you that your computer is infected. It just does not exist. So that person will call you and trick you into doing something with your computer. And the same is with the people claiming coming from Microsoft. And they tell you, look, your computer is providing information to Microsoft. And it does. Well, it provides information to Microsoft. So it's a credible story that they come with and say, okay, from that information, we can tell your computer is infected. And then people don't think about, yeah, Microsoft actually doesn't provide that service. And they also don't know that my phone number is connected to the computer. And so there's a lot of things wrong with that story, but still people are surprised, they are anxious about what's happening with their computer, they use it for banking and whatnot, so they follow what the people tell them. But this is, you don't need to have a lot of technical knowledge to do that. You need to be trained in being convincing to talk to people. And there's it's more like organized crime rather than highly technical people sitting there and hacking into your computers. And I think this is where we need to understand how things work and where things go wrong and where people lose money on these kind of scams. And then we can also start about thinking what can we do to prevent it. And that's where some of the tricky parts come in, I think.
Hello, Carson.
So, yeah.
My name is Liban. Good to meet you. Just a quick question. So I think a lot of people have been familiar with these sorts of things on their computer, but with phones being the sort of primary device for many people, and the first point of sort of entry to secure systems like banking or for work applications or whatever else, is there a sort of approach or a way to protect your phone from hacking? Like with computers, I guess it's just a general sense of being vigilant, or you can install antivirus, or if things go too far, you can always like sort of encrypt your data or format your machine or whatever. But with phones, I guess it's either, I guess it's harder to tell first you've been hacked, and it's not quite clear what to do if once you realize you've been hacked.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and good question. And unfortunately, you're right. There's no good way to know that your phone has been hacked, and that's probably also true for your computer. But the problem with it is that usually people just use the phone. Let's say my security experts argue for multi-factor authorization. But for most people, multi-factor means it's 2 factors on the same phone. And that's where things get really difficult. So in principle, if you want it to be more secure, you probably would do your electronic banking on your computer and then use a second device like your phone for the second factor. Even that can still be hacked, and malicious guys could bring it together, but it gets at least a bit more difficult to do it. So having everything on a single device like a phone is probably not the best way to do it. Then I mean, there's ways you can reduce the risk, like you can let's say not install lots of different apps on your phone. There's a critical thing is actually QR codes, because we're all now trained to scanning QR codes, right? Like we go everywhere, we scan QR codes with our Victoria app for checking in for COVID, and we scan QR codes to get a recipe for a package of spices I've bought, and we scan QR codes for all kinds of things. The problem is, while I'm human, I cannot understand QR codes. So there's some information in that QR code. So if I go somewhere and it's a QR code I scan, and somebody has, let's say, glued another QR code on top, and I think it's something else, I can be tricked into going to a malicious website or do something where either that website tries to hack my phone and install something, or tricks me into putting in my login information into something. So the problem is that there's a really long list of things that can happen, that it's quite difficult to give one simple answer on what to do. And I mean, there are really good websites where you can get all this information. There's, for example, a company called Get Safe Online in the UK. I think the website, let me quickly have a look. I think it's getsafeonline.org. It's really easy to remember. And they have excellent information. The problem is, it's just a lot of information, and it's really difficult to go through everything and really understand all the different risks. So unfortunately, the short answer for your question is there's no kind of easy fix for that. There's no antivirus software that you can install on a phone or even on a computer that would kind of detect all the different things that can happen, because there's always new stuff coming up that the antivirus will not find. And even we had cases where antivirus themselves had vulnerabilities and could be exploited. So it's unfortunately it's quite difficult.
Now, Dr. Carson, I just want to ask you a question about one of the issues I encounter when talking about this with the community members is people, laptop, iPad, PC, they understand that that's a computer. In other words, it has an operating system, programs, applications. So clear definition, that's a computer. Then all of a sudden you have a mobile phone, smart mobile phone, and that link is no longer there. People don't see the mobile phone also just as another computer where you can actually have the operating system, the applications, and what have you. So in other words, they belittle, they will say, well, this is just a mobile phone, so it's not really, capable of doing all this hacking and what have you. Is that something you encounter with all your students or other people you deal with? In other words, is there a demarcation where people don't realize the mobile phone is so powerful now? It's just as good as, or even better than some old PCs. Is that another phenomenon that you encounter, or do you want to talk about this?
People do understand that it's like a computer, but I think there's a general kind of perception that the mobile phone is more secure because it's less open like on a computer, I can install everything I want from everywhere I want, basically. On a mobile phone, let's say if it's from Apple, it's more controlled in that Apple ecosystem. If it's from Google, Android, it's more in that. Well, I can add other app stores if I wanted to, but maybe I don't. And then I think, yeah, it's quite controlled, and then Google is controlling all these apps, and that probably creates a bit of a false perception of security and safety in that environment. And we have seen there are tools that are, for example, used by police and secret services, intelligence to hack into iPhones and also Android phones. So there are vulnerabilities that can be exploited, and if let's say the official organizations or agencies in our country where we might have a particular level of trust in them that they will not do it with my phone and they will not steal my money, and that if they can do it, there's also the question whether also the bad guys, the criminals, might be able to do it as well, even if that technology is in principle controlled. But it shows us that there are ways to do it, and I think we need to have that understanding that we need to assume that some things can happen to it. If I use it to transfer my money, maybe I need to double check that I transfer it to the right person, that I don't install apps for money transfer just because they claim to be cheaper, where I don't really know what's behind, and maybe I don't transfer all my money in one step and lose it because it was some dodgy app to do it, and so I think we need to kind of have a bit of a understanding of the risks behind the system.
Yeah. Now I want to ask you. I'm getting a lot of questions, but they are related to that questionnaire. We asked the community about getting some feedback, which is okay. That's very good, and I think maybe from Lucita will probably later on answer those questions. But the one that I'm interested in, someone mentioned, is about cybersecurity at a national level, which now reminds me about that Oxford project about the CMM. The majority model. Now, do you want to talk to us a little bit about this? Because a lot of people are interested, but no one really knows what is it all about. Or I think in Somalia, they've already done it, or I'm not really sure. I haven't seen the report. So can you please tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, our collaboration with Oxford, which is now going on for a bit more than 3 years, I think, uses a model that was developed by Oxford together with other partners, which is called the cybersecurity maturity model for nations. And the idea is, maybe some people are familiar with that ITU cybersecurity index, which basically for each country gives like a number, and you can see where your country sits compared to other countries. And it uses a few indicators for that. It's basically like a desktop research thing to compare the countries. So the model that we use is not that kind of index. It's not to compare countries. It's really about analyzing in detail the cybersecurity maturity for that nation, and then develop recommendations that are specific for that nation and not for comparison with others. And there's probably two important aspects to it. So the first is, it's not just based on desktop research, like publicly available information. The main source of information is by talking to people, relevant people in the country. So the way it works is, if there's no COVID and we can travel, that a team would travel to the country and would spend there most of the time 4 days up to a week maybe, and with a lot of work before, together with the government, we would get people together into focus group discussions, and these people are across all different areas that are relevant. Think education, law, police, technical cybersecurity, the computer emergency response, telecoms, financial institutions, etc. So we try to get really that wide overview, and then we run these focus groups session that are all recorded, and we have a long list of questions that we go through, and then we can have open discussions in it as well. And then we take all these recordings and analyze them, transcribe them, and then from there we combine that with the available material like existing policies, laws. Some countries have joined the Budapest Convention, for example, and they have the framework and regulation around that. And some have education in cybersecurity, others don't. So we collect all that information, and then a report is written that is probably around 150 pages, quite detailed recommendations. And this goes to the country and is reviewed there. Before it goes also to a technical board of Oxford, so that the quality is remained very high. And then the country can decide what to do with it. So we don't own that report, it's owned by the nation. So they can decide whether they want to publish it, bring it into their discussions in the government, act on it, build policy out of it, just take up a few recommendations. So there's lots of different reactions. Samoa, for example, has published the report and basically taken up all the recommendations in it to turn them into policy, and that other countries are a bit slower in it. And this process has been applied to, I think, more than 84 or 87 countries all over the world. And I think Somalia has done this kind of exercise, but in a remote way, and probably in a less strict way than it would be possible if you are actually in the country, if you can get the people together. But it's at least as a first step. And I have not seen the report because, well, it's usually a confidential data, so it was not us doing it. I think it was the Oxford team and the people in South Africa together doing this. So that's, but it's an important exercise because it can really show you where can you start with the next step in improving security on a national level. Like what kind of legal frameworks do you need to even get a computer emergency response team operational, and that all that kind of questions are discussed in that report.
Well, that's very, very useful to know, because a lot of people were actually asking about this. So I will forward that information and say, look, or probably they will watch what you are saying. So if the Oxford people and the South African group help Somalia, so hopefully we'll get that report published, and it might also help Somalia secure its own IT environment and so on. So that's very good news to know. But I think the same thing happened in the Pacific region. So is that now all done? Do we know?
No, it's an ongoing project. So far we have worked with 7 countries across the Pacific region, like Samoa, Tonga, Vanuatu, Federal States of Micronesia, Papua New Guinea, Tuvalu, don't know if I've left one out, Kiribati, and the goal of our center is, and what we are funding for from the Victorian government, is to do this with up to 15 countries in the region. So this is an ongoing project, but it has been slowed down a bit by COVID. We have done one review online with Tuvalu, which is a really small country, so it worked reasonably well. But it's definitely better to do it in person. So we hope that next year we might be able to take up a bit more speed and do it in person again. And now, well, the thing is, you can't do the review and then go away and say, okay, now you've got the report and yeah, be happy with it, and you go on. So countries in the Pacific also need support in then building capacity and going the next steps. So we have also started doing that now. So we work with the countries where we have done the reviews to discuss possible prioritization. So it's not our role to tell what to do and what to prioritize. Well, we can can give a bit of context and help in that discussion. And now we have the first few projects with some of the countries to work on specific areas, for example, cybercrime legislation, or working with plans on using blockchain for different things. We can support them to really understand the risks and understand which platforms might be useful or might not be useful. And so we have all these academics from the 8 universities that are behind the center can support us in that. And then we can work with countries to basically look at all these different aspects. For example, the legal issues in the federal states of Micronesia. Some colleagues from law, from Monash, work with them to build a strategy and to build up that legal framework. And there's all these different experts that we can bring in. So that's quite, I think we're quite in a good position with the center to have access to all these people.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Somalia is going through election time, and hopefully with the new government, I'm sure they will be interested to know the outcome from that exercise. And I'm also trying to link them up with the Pacific region. So basically lessons learned, what can we learn from the experience from this region? But a lot of questions are coming in, but they are a different thing now. People are more interested in mobile money, cryptocurrencies, and blockchain, and what have you. So I don't really know whether you have time, but I will try to combine like a theme. Maybe I can push them to like a thematic way. So the one that basically it's like 70 or 60% of the questions are about the move to cryptos and what's happening to money as we knew and so on. Now, what's interesting, I don't know whether you follow in Africa and the Horn of Africa, especially with the remittances. Now, a lot of people are moving to using the digital currencies. Now, looking at it from security aspect, do you want to share some ideas with us, or are there any warnings or some areas you want to highlight? There's a lot of enthusiasm about cashless, and we're now going to crypto, and we're all digital and so on. But from academic point of view and from Monash and the people who know more about this area, do you want to share with us your ideas? Are there any warnings and anything you want to highlight, or anything else you want to share with us in that area, please? There seem to be a lot of questions about this.
Yeah, it's a really complex and fascinating area, and we probably could spend the rest of the day talking about it. And it's not, there's no easy answer for that. So I think the first thing is really fascinating, and there has been a lot of very interesting developments, and we have seen now over the years that at least the concept of the digital currency based on that distributed structure of blockchain has shown to be relatively stable. So it seems to work. So there have been no kind of dramatic problems with that principle. But there's a lot of things to be considered. So I think the first very pragmatic one is that you put your money into blockchain, but then how do you pay with it? Like where do you use that kind of money? Because it's not that you go to a shop and you pay with your cryptocurrency. It's not accepted in many places, and it's also not extremely practical to use still. It's also slow, a lot of them, and so it's eventually you probably need to change it into a fiat currency. And that's where the interesting questions come, because the exchange rates are extremely dynamic, and at the moment, in many cases, in the long term, the value of the cryptocurrencies went up, but it also went down dramatically in between, and that can happen all the time, and it depends a lot on political decisions by the government. So it's not only the market controlling it. It can be changes in regulation can make dramatic differences, and you don't really have control over that. So there's that caveat that, let's say, putting all your money into crypto, you need to understand that it's a quite volatile market, which can change very, very quickly. The second thing is that in order to interact with a blockchain, usually would go via some exchange. And that's another security issue, that you basically depend on that exchange. Because they could basically access your money. It's a bit like you need to have the same level of trust like into your bank, but it's not the same level of regulation. And that is where things get a bit tricky. And you need to understand that basically your exchange has that kind of power over your money in many cases, right? So it's but that doesn't matter if it's kind of like your usual cash that you use, like not a big amount of money that you put into a blockchain, but it might become a bit more problematic if it's basically your main way to keep money. And I mean, regulation is catching up, and there's things happening, and also some of the banks have started in Australia now acting a bit as exchanges and that, so they try to play in that game as well, but they're far from being as strong as the bigger exchanges that we usually would use for that. So it's a moving thing. And then finally, there's so many different cryptocurrencies out there that is really difficult to keep track of, and there are a lot of scams in that world as well. Like just recently, there was one that people came up with that didn't even have the mechanism implemented to withdraw your money or use it or sell it. So still people invested into it. And so these people made a lot of money, and then they said, yeah, sorry, okay, it's now gone because you can't actually do anything. So there's really interesting scams coming up as well. And so and it's difficult to keep informed, really. And so I don't know if there's specific questions around that you have.
No, see, what happened was, in the specific case of Somalia, sometime back, a year or 2 years ago, there were serious problems in that sector, because there were people who were abusing the word forex. We know now part of the world what forex means, and their rules and regulations and markets and what have you. And it was a scam. So a lot of people in Somalia lost money through that forex. Now then, we're going through this crypto again era, and a lot of people again jumped in. Now, of course, the difference now is with the mobile money and that forex problems back home, they were localized. In other words, the mobile money in Somalia is within Somalia. Basically, you use your mobile and the provider and so on. But with the cryptos, it's globalized. In other words, the exchanges are anywhere. You might be dealing with exchange in Hong Kong or Sydney or New York. There's a cross-border payments, too complicated. And at the end, there's no fallback position. There's no one you can call or no office you can go to. And so to me, the way I look at it is maybe the risk is higher, although sometimes also there could be some returns that God knows how it works, but some people might even make money out of this. So that's really the area we would like to know. I guess in your case, in academia, you probably know a bit more about the technology and you understand all those problems. So if there are any ideas you can share, or how do we, I guess the best answer we're looking for is how do you avoid, how do you mitigate the risk? But I don't know whether that is possible or whether you can share that with us.
The problem is, it's kind of the idea of the blockchain is that you don't have that trusted entity running it, right? It's a distributed system. And so it's kind of built in that there's nobody to complain to if something goes wrong. And there's no solution for that, because that's how the system is supposed to work. Let's say you put money, you buy Bitcoin, and then you're stupid enough to lose your passcode to get access to your money, yeah, it's gone. Nobody will ever access it. It will just sit on that blockchain as a transaction, and then nobody can get it. And there's no way to recover it because there's no organization where you can go to and say, look, can you please reset my password and I want to get that access back. But that's built into the system. It's not well, it doesn't always work with the banks as well because they do other things that are risky, but it's kind of built in, and there's no, if you want to have that total decentralization of a blockchain, it's up to you to kind of keep on top of that, and because there's nobody to complain to, and also if somebody steals your passcode, yeah, what do you do? I mean, that's even if I had discussions with some law experts on what is actually a crime in blockchain. Let's say if the blockchain is built in a way that some particular types of transactions are built into the system, and somebody does these transactions and you lose your money, basically, is that a crime or not? Is it just using the system like it's supposed to be, or is somebody really stealing stuff from you? And it's different if they trick you into kind of like changing your money into digital currency and then they steal that, etc. Then it automatically becomes a crime. But it's just things that live within that blockchain. It actually gets, even on the legal side, it gets complicated. And there's some risks in that as well.
No, that is very interesting point you raised. See, I also spoke to a lot of people about this. I'm actively involved in this for different reasons. And again, from the legal aspect, the definition was when something is stolen. In other words, digitally, can you actually steal something? And the laws are not catching up yet. In other words, the legal systems are far behind the technology in this area. So the example I was giving to, I almost laughed, but it was actually serious. I couldn't laugh. The guy said, look, if you have a Word document or a photo or some digital entity, and I take that from you, but you still have it. I only got a copy. So I didn't deprive you. In other words, you have your thesis or your book or whatever it was, or your art that you spend years drawing, but then I got a copy. So legally speaking, he said nothing's stolen. In other words, stealing, the definition of a stealing is you're depriving someone something they own. I almost laughed. I said, look, isn't that a joke? He said, no, it's not a joke. That's where the law is. So yeah, the legal system is still catching up. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, for that example, there's maybe have other laws for, let's say, copyright, intellectual property, that kind of things. In the digital currencies, if you're deprived from being able to use that digital money to buy something, I think it's stealing from you.
Yeah.
But then it's the question, what kind of, because there's no contract with that digital currency. So who kind of guarantees for that digital money in some way, and what's kind of the basis of that that transaction that you might have? Like if I have cash, when there's strong regulations around cash, so kind of the government guarantees that cash has some kind of value, and so if it's stolen, it's very clear. But with the digital currencies, is less clear, because you don't go into a contract with some entity that guarantees you that you can use that digital information to buy stuff, and that's what you get deprived from, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I get the point, but the thing is, when I went to Monashuni, in fact, we met a few weeks ago, where we had the coffee. I used to go there and study, and I did economics there. And they used to teach us Eco 101, what's the definition of money? And there were 3 or 4 definitions. I think there were 3 big one definitions, and it's a means of exchange or unit of account and all these. And as I walk back decades later at Monash, those definitions, I think, need to be redefined now, because I don't think they're valid anymore. Because now, I don't even carry cash anymore, but the last time I saw a note, there's something that says this is a legal tender. In other words, it's a central bank issued and it's a legal tender, and I can go back and the shop cannot refuse. They have to accept and so on. Now, and if I lose it, or if it's torn or something, I can go back to the bank and get another one, or all those other norms and possibilities. But with the crypto, if I have a Bitcoin, and as you said, I lose the barcode, then that's it. It's gone. There's nowhere to go. No one, in fact, no one to call. In the story. So, and on the other hand, though, it can be valuable. We can do trading. In fact, last week, MoneyGram and I think Stellar, they joined. They're now working together. So within the US, you can transfer money. You can do remittance using Stellar. This is a new development that for the Somali group, that will have a huge impact, because if we move to that level, what it means is remittance as we knew is gone. There will be new way of doing business. So that's really an area that perhaps the last 10 minutes or whatever time left, if you can expand on that a bit more, what can be done? What ideas, what is the thinking in academia? Is this the way forward, or do you think this is just another blip, something that we have to go through? And is it a phase we are going through, or you think this is here to stay? What do you think?
Yeah, it's difficult to look into the future. I think the problem with the current proof of work type of blockchains is that on one hand, the proof of work idea works. Like you can kind of create a stable system out of that proof of work idea, but it also restricts the scalability of that system. So I think currently it's feasible to, let's say, go towards a remittance model where you use the blockchain to internationally transfer the money, but then at the end, people would still need to change it to fiat currency to actually use it. And then if you change it to your local currency, some of the big advantages are lost directly. You might change it to US dollar if it's allowed to do that in the country. Is not always possible, as you know. Then it might be more stable, but that kind of removes a lot of the big advantages that you have. So I think what is currently still a bit future or open is the way to get to a digital currency that I can actually pay everywhere with. We don't have that yet. Actually, even in Australia, very few places where you can pay with currency, and very often it's even more like a digital currency crypto ATM, where you just have a place in the shop where you can change it to banknotes or digital or fiat currency. Actually, directly paying with your crypto is not possible in most of the places. So I think as long as we don't have that, and currently we don't really see how we can get there, and there's several reasons for it. The first is there's just too many cryptocurrencies. Like you could have like a few of the big ones. Shops might go, okay, yeah, we accept that one. But will they be willing to accept 200 different ones? Yeah, maybe not. Do they really see and what do they do with them? Who covers the risks with that if you accept 200? Because like 10 of them might just disappear, or they suddenly become because there's some problem with the code that nobody knew about, so the value disappears. So it's just, I think we're quite far away from, let's say, turning the economy from a fiat currency based one into a cryptocurrency based one, because of all these different questions on scalability, on risks, and that. I don't know if you've probably seen that Melbourne University as kind of more as a publicity thing accepted cryptocurrency for a research project. That was like $200,000. If you look at the size of Melbourne University, the risk is little,
Peanuts.
small. So it's still nice to see, and still they are the first in Australia to do it, and it's a bit surprising for a quite conservative university to do it. But then if you look at it, the risk is really small. If it was the proposition to say, okay, you turn like 50% of your research income you take in cryptocurrencies, they probably would go, the risk is way too to do that. So that's kind of where we are, and there's, from the research side, we have the different visions of what could be done, but I think it's relatively open on where we can go and which models could actually work at the end. I think what will stay and what will stay for a long time is having cryptocurrencies for everything where the risk of it failing is something that we can live with.
Well, thank you, Dr. Carson, for that. I think that was very informative and educational. Finally, if someone from Somalia were to call you the central bank or the Minister of Finance or someone, and I know you're not here to give advice, but to seek your reaction to Somalia moving into CDBC or some digital currency, what would be your reaction? And if you don't mind, I'm going to share this with the rest of the community. So,
yeah. So,
what do you think?
So the thing is, if somebody would call me, I would not be able to give a quick answer. We currently have a project that we just start with the country of Tuvalu to have like a scientific support project to work through options on how to use blockchain and for what and why and that. And I think that's probably the way. We have the Blockchain Technology Center at Monash University with the people who really work on the core protocols, on the cryptography, on all the technology inside. So we have, I'm more on the one level of abstraction towards using it, but we have my colleagues who really, I think, Jean-Chan and Joseph, and they really know by heart inside all the different cryptography and the mathematics and the risks and they join this project with Tuvalu, so that we can really go to the core of it and see what blockchain platform would be suitable for which application, and what are the risks, how to build it. Why do you lose sovereignty if you move your control over your currency to an exchange that sits outside of your country? Where do you? So all these kind of questions would need to be kind of worked through a bit, and so it makes sense to kind of take these experts and go through a project and really analyze this. And it doesn't need to take very long. It's probably an exercise that takes like 3-4 months, and then there's a better understanding of where to go.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dr. Carson, for all of that. There was the Singapore FinTech a few weeks ago, and the Bank of International Settlements, and a lot of other people are doing very active programs on this. So I'm going to share that with my community, but also I want to thank you about that engagement with the Somali community in Australia. I'm getting a lot of positive feedback about that questionnaire, and I'm looking forward to see the outcome of that project as well. So I think we'll leave it there. A lot of more questions. Maybe I'll email them to you, and maybe you can condense it and we'll share with the community. I think we'll leave it there, but if you have any last word or something, over to you, Carson. But I really want to thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Mohammed, for organizing this and inviting me. I think this kind of connections and community events are really important to really understand what's there and what we can do together. And if there's anybody, let's say from Somali government or somewhere interested in things like the CMM or other activities, I can also create the links to the Oceania Cybersecurity Center and to the people there, and also to get the right people in South Africa, maybe in Oxford, on board. So if there's some interest, please reach out to me and I can probably create the links.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are a lot of people watching this, but I'll also pass a message. And tomorrow there's Professor Cheryl Saunders is joining us from Melbourne Uni, who will also talk about Somalia and so on. And for your information, we actually have 2 papers today to be presented. One of them is about an NFT project. So the Somali artist is moving into NFT, and there is another paper, or someone is giving a talk on Bitcoin, the idea of using a crypto coin for homelessness, solution for the homelessness in Somalia. So interesting things are happening. I'll keep you informed, and you're quite welcome to join us later on and also tomorrow morning if you have time. I want to thank you again on my behalf and on behalf of the Somali community here and back home. So thank you very much, Dr. Hassan. Thank you very much for your time.
Great pleasure to join.
Thank you. Okay, well, we'll continue. You're welcome to stay. I think we'll have a break now for 10-15 minutes, and we'll come back. Normally, we usually have coffee breaks in real conferences, but now we're virtual. Maybe we'll have a virtual coffee break, and we'll resume again in 20 minutes. Thank you very much again, Dr. Carson. Okay, we'll see you all in 20 minutes. Thank you, Peter.